my contention is that the right to bear arms is the most important political issue in the world. And I'm going to take that even further and say that the right to bear arms is the most important political issue in human history. The biggest problem that we've faced as human beings in history for the last 10,000 or so years is gang violence. Government's the biggest gang.
Uncle Trump has one shot, one opportunity to stop the death of America. Uncle Trump has one shot, opportunity to stop the death of America. One moment with the freedom of interest, but with DC written, yo. Vivek's palms are sweaty, 6-bit job gets heavy. There's curry on his sweater already, mom's tandoori. He's nervous, but DOD is getting order ready to drop bombs, cause he gon' got the fat with Eddie. He goes down, DC crowd cries so loud. He opens his mouth, the words you find just come out. They choking now, we the people joking now. The clock's run out, time's up, over, back. Snap back, DOD, Elon, face with gravity. Oprah, bureaucracy, choke, he's so ready. No boast, make it look easy. No, he works at it, he knows he'll push him in the... Gotta keep him alive. Stand together. Start World War III. Make America great again.
Greetings, conversationalists from across the fruited plain. It is good to be back here at the MAGA Kingdom Report. As always, with our host, Frank Scavo, myself, your favorite J6er. We also have Anastasia Theodoropoulos and Dr. Richard Panzer. And today we're going to jump right in. We have a special guest, Attorney Jim Ostrowski. Rich, why don't you tell us a little bit about Attorney Ostrowski and what he does?
Well, he's been a speaker at the Rotterdam Film Festival. That's the big thing for me. But in addition to that, he's founder of the Liberty Movement, which we want to find out more about. And he's been filing cases
to protect the Second Amendment.
Good. That's what we need.
Yeah. So, Jim, tell us about your latest Second Amendment lawsuit. Tell us about yourself and why did you decide to found the Liberty Movement?
Well, that's a 3-hour question, but I'll try to give it a soundbite treatment. So, been in politics for about 50 years because my father was a judge, and up in Buffalo, the judges are elected. So I grew up with elections, politics, got involved very early, was originally a kind of a liberal Democrat of that era. It's a little different then than it is now. There wasn't the leftism that we have now. But then got into the libertarian movement during college, not because of college, but found it on my own. And I spent about 30 so years in every conceivable type of politics you could imagine. Third party, Republican Party. I had been in the Democratic Party, various minor parties, independent lines, you name it, lawsuits, lobbying, courts. And I just concluded around 2010 that none of these things seem to be working, certainly not on behalf of the concept of liberty or really much else except the special interest. So I said there must be another way, and I don't know how exactly I got into it, but I started looking at the concept of what I call direct citizen action. So I'm not categorically against voting and elections and all that, but I really think that the liberty movement and its allies need to focus more on direct action, which in the sentence is, what can the individual do today to move both his own life and society towards liberty? And I'll just give you a quick example because I don't want to talk everybody to death. Voting with your feet. You can vote, you can move to a different state or a county, or even in your area. You can move to, for example, Buffalo. The city of Buffalo has lower property taxes than across the street. There's a long, complicated reason for that, but it's true. So we voted with our feet to lower our property taxes. So voting with your feet is, I think, one of the better examples of direct action.
Okay, great. And then tell us about your lawsuits.
Sure. Well, I've been, a Second Amendment proponent for really as long as I've been a libertarian. And I did file a major lawsuit against Andrew Cuomo to try to knock out the New York pistol permit law. And it was very frustrating because although I challenged the law on a lot of different specific grounds, I also challenged the idea of a licensing law at all, and that it's inconsistent with the Second Amendment. And I never really got an answer. And then on the other issues, the court down in New York City ruled against me. I went up to the Supreme Court. They didn't take my case, but in the Bruin case, the subsequent case, they mentioned my case having been wrongly decided. So I have a lot more ammunition, no pun intended, excuse me. I'm sorry. A lot more arguments I want to make. I've learned a lot more. I've actually written 2 books on the Second Amendment, really as a result of my the lawsuits that I filed, and just trying to keep peeling the onion deeper and deeper into what it's really all about. So I'm planning one final Second Amendment lawsuit to really make New York a constitutional carry state by court decision, because the legislature is certainly never going to do it. They're very anti-gun. And my basic take on the Second Amendment is we're arguing from we play defense and we don't make the right argument. So I believe the correct argument, and again I'll sum it up, we can talk about it if you want, is that the Second Amendment, the purpose of it is to deter government tyranny. If you understand that, then you can look at the empirical evidence, and which nobody ever does because the researchers don't believe in the government tyranny argument, but I do. I've looked at it. Once you look at it that way, the evidence falls into line, and it's crystal clear that the Second Amendment works.
Okay,
it does deter government tyranny.
Yeah. So when you say
The evidence, are you talking about the record of countries which ban gun ownership becoming totalitarian, or what type of evidence are you talking about?
Yes, all of that. In my latest book, I actually did, as far as I know, the first ever study comparing 165 countries based on their level of violence. And there's 5 categories. I do include street crime, of course, but there's also other categories such as war and terrorism and excuse me, and the government itself is a source of violence. If you look at it scientifically and not in a biased way, the government itself perpetuates a lot of acts of violence. So, and I finally figured out how to sort of rank governments, and long story short, the study that we did concludes that the United States, contrary to gun control propaganda, is not an unusually violent country. It's actually an unusually peaceful country, given the fact that it's a large, diverse country with essentially open borders, at least until recently. And so we rank the U.S. as 27th most peaceful country, which contradicts all the academics, all the gun control propaganda, and in some international organizations. But I stand by the research. You could tweak it, a little bit here, a little bit there, 1% here, 1% there, but basically we're correct. So the empirical in the United States, to put a little bit more concrete on it, we have avoided a long list of atrocities that are relatively common throughout history and relatively common in the world today and in recent world history, such as genocide and democide and concentration camps and the things of that nature. We did have concentration camps in World War II. I hope nobody thinks that I'm not aware of that, but they weren't death camps. They were, I think, wrong, but they weren't death camps like you had in, Cambodia, Nazi Germany, Soviet Union. So the empirical, once you understand the idea of the Second Amendment, you can then see just open your eyes and see all the evidence that the Second Amendment does indeed work. It doesn't work perfectly. It's not a utopian idea, but it actually does work.
Okay, so Second Amendment and gun ownership decreases.
crime, decreases violence. That's your argument?
I think it does, because in some of the one of the things we point out in the book, there's a great crime. There's a very useful crime map. I think it's one of the private security companies that did it. We used it, and what we found is that there's tremendously variable rates of crime in the United States. So it's not a question of like, is the United States a high crime country? It's because crime, as I pointed out in the book, crime is a zip code problem. If you look at it by zip code, in New York City, for example, there's 5 boroughs. New York has the strictest gun laws. New York City has stricter gun laws than the state.
That's right.
So you would think if gun laws determine the level of crime, there'd be kind of a uniformly high level of crime throughout New York City. It's not true. The highest crime rate's in the Bronx, which has the same gun laws, the same regulations, same enforcement. However, it's even more interesting than that. I found that inside the Bronx, one zip code has had 7 times more crime than another zip code, perhaps 5 to 10 miles away in the Bronx. So it's not, again, through empirical research, which has really rarely been looked at, we found that crime is not correlated to gun ownership. In fact, if anything, there's a correlation, there's an opposite correlation. For example, in Wyoming County, which is right near Buffalo, it's a rural county. People are heavily armed there, as you might expect. And the crime rate, again, comparing it to the Bronx, is significantly lower. And in fact, our highest crime neighborhoods, which is basically the inner cities of the United States, although the criminals are very often armed, if you look at the general ownership of guns among the population, it's actually less.
Right.
So where you have fewer guns, as Professor Lott has said, you have fewer guns, you have more crime.
Right.
Well, here's the other thing. President Trump has been reporting, and that really was part of his speech when he took care of Washington, D.C. and cleaned it up by putting in the National Guard and cleaning it up. And you see all over social media, you see natives of the area going on and praising how now we really have Black Lives Matter, because there hasn't been one murder in like 20 days since it started. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's been reported by our side, by the independents, and people who are fairly minded, which is almost every city that is immense in crime is run by liberals or progressives. So it is that ideology that you just spoke about, which is against the Second Amendment, against being able to defend oneself, and you see the highest crime there. Do you think we're at the point right now, because people are watching more podcasts, there is more opportunities to pick and choose your media, and decide for yourself what's real or not? Do you think there's a better opportunity now for the rest of these cities to be cleaned up? Because I think the Democrats are dead on arrival with everything now that it's all being exposed.
Yeah, there's definitely more sources of information that the mainstream media traditionally would support gun control. They still do. Whenever there's a mass shooting, they immediately go into a gun control script, as opposed to trying to understand, well, why did this shooting happen? Scientifically, if you want to solve a problem, your first thing you have to do is not talk about solutions, but talk about causation and why something actually happened. And they never actually do that. And in terms of urban crime, guns are a scapegoat. So I have a whole theory on this. I wrote a book about progressivism a primer. So progressivism, not leftism, but sort of Woodrow Wilson progressivism that we've all inherited and grew up with, basically says that any problem that comes along is going to be solved by the government. Well, it doesn't work, but the progressive is always looking for a scapegoat. So when their policies failed, the Great Society failed, it broke apart the black family. As a criminal defense lawyer, I know that many of the defendants I represented did not grow up with a father in the home. The government schools have failed these people as well. But instead of recalibrating and saying, we might have been wrong, maybe the Great Society was wrong, they never want to admit that they're wrong. And so what do they need scapegoats. And guns are a perfect scapegoat because they're not the government. It's a way to blame. What I'd like to say is a scapegoat is useful when it's a non-governmental entity. So you blame guns, you're implicitly blaming law-abiding gun owners for the problem, and you distract away from the underlying causes of the problem, as I've alluded to.
So let me ask you another question. For law-abiding citizens who do the background checks, get their background checks done, and own guns, okay? And, we're great Americans. We like to shoot, but we also like to go cross-country and visit the many beautiful places of these United States. And it's unfortunate that one has to be aware of the legalities of each of the states.
57.
Sometimes you got to drive around. You got to drive around if you're smart,
right.
Or you're going to make all kinds of strange, things that you have to do just to protect yourself legally. God forbid you're stopped. You don't want to be arrested.
Right.
So my point is this. Do you think we'll ever get to the place where federally we don't have to worry about them, that we could all be on one page? Because it seems to me that the Constitution is for the entire United States. So the Second Amendment should be as well. Am I crazy?
No, I actually have an idea. And I'm restructuring my business activities so I can work more on the Second Amendment in the future than I actually already have. So one of my ideas, and I think it mirrors what a bill that Thomas Massey has in, I'm not sure if it's exactly identical, but under the 14th Amendment, the Congress is given the power to pass laws to protect the rights protected by the 14th Amendment. In the McDonald case, which applied the Second Amendment to the states for the first time, they said that one of the purposes of the 14th Amendment was to protect the right to bear arms, particularly among freed slaves, but generally speaking, everyone. And so I have a very simple idea. In fact, I'm going to be contacting Congressman Massey in due course, sooner rather than later, and say, look, we need a bill where Congress basically states that every American citizen has a right to constitutional carry anywhere in the country. And if that bill was passed and signed, then it would solve that problem of you have to have like a color-coded map when you travel through the country, or a darn good hiding place, maybe under the sewage system of your RV, to hide your gun, just to make sure that you're not the victim of crime in the middle of the night when you're parked at some remote campsite or in a national park. So yes, we need, and I'm going to be working for this, and I have been working for it, but I'll be working for it more aggressively in the future. We need national constitutional carry. And although I'm not one to advocate that everything be done from Washington, this is a clear example. This is the most important right, in my view. In fact, you can get into it more, but I think the right to bear arms is the most important political issue in human history, other than perhaps war and peace. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, we need a federal law guaranteeing your right to, without government permission, to have firearms for your protection.
Jim, I agree with that, and here's why. Unconstitutional carry works very well. For all the felons and criminals that live in New York State and New York City, when they come down to Scranton, Pennsylvania, Worcester, Pennsylvania, with their illegal weapons, with their nefarious activity, well, those firearms discharge very well. And it seems like in the public, if you're not one of their targets, you're relatively safe. If you're not in their line of fire, or if you're not one of their victims, they're carrying the gun, right? And nobody really knows, including the police and the authorities. But I like the way you're thinking about this and saying that how can I put it? My question would be, the government, if they were to confiscate all guns in the United States, how long through your research, maybe you know, maybe you don't, would it take for our rights to erode and degrade to a degree where we would become pretty much captives of the United States government?
Slaves.
With slaves. With your research, have you seen where maybe like Venezuela, where a government was pro people at one point, and within 5 to 10 years after the guns have been confiscated, that they go into this communist apparatchik dictatorship?
But Frank, you're
Yeah.
being very insensitive.
True,
Okay.
but
All
we
right.
have to be insensitive.
I mean, look, the people who bought guns illegally, they are victims. They deserve reparations and reciprocity. So letting them have it.
Well, if we look at Australia, for example, and their gun rights were taken away, and it's interesting because we have patriot friends in Australia,
That was the question.
and there are some tough, God-loving folks. And I said, "How the heck did you let your guns be taken away? I just don't get it." And they said, "Well, it's one simple thing. Only the United States Constitution has a Second Amendment, and that is what's protecting the American people."
Right. The
And
founding
now
fathers.
they go into the tribes in Australia, and we saw what happened with COVID, and people were taken away. And if you made a comment on social media, they would break into your house and have you arrested, and you don't know who these people are, and you're having all your rights infringed upon because, dare I say, because you don't have the right to defend yourself.
And maybe that extends to South Africa, where you have the targeting of whites sanctioned by the government. So that's the question. Like, once you lose your guns, how fast do you become the victim in a society where the government is just totalitarian and they don't care?
But it's a good question, and it's in my book. I talked about this issue. So here's the biggest problem is this: the government is always growing anyway, and so if you ask yourself what actually limits the government, that's a very short list because government grows by its very nature. So one thing that could limit the government is ideological resistance. Robert Higgs wrote a book called Crisis in Leviathan where we talked about this. In the early days of the United States, we had the population was very libertarian. They didn't want big government. So that restrained government growth. Government can get so big that it collapses the society, which I think is probably what happened in the Soviet Union. The government can be invaded or and taken over that way. But the list of things that restrain government growth is very short. And I think that the most important one is that the government is afraid of a revolution if they go too far. Now, people don't like to talk about this. It's not polite. It sounds like we're encouraging violence. No, we're just analyzing what restrains government. I think that the Second Amendment works by just being there, by people having guns. It doesn't cause violence. It prevents violence because it keeps the government honest to the extent that we can do that in this world. So
We
we've
are
seen
a
time after
well-armed
time
nation.
where
But we don't
right
have to
before a genocide or right before a war, right before an ethnic cleansing, the people are disarmed. I think the evidence is clear. There's no, it's, the problem is that really, I've argued this with people. The only country in the world with a constitutional right to bear arms is the United States. People will claim there's 2 or 3 other countries. I've looked at them, but I think one example you can look at, because there was a reference to free speech being violated. England used to have a firearm culture tradition, and they had kind of a common law right to bear arms. That's all gone now, and what's happening in England? You can be arrested for posting on social media. In fact, they threatened to arrest Elon Musk. And I think I was the only lawyer to point out, hey, you're violating the NATO treaty. Why are we still in NATO? NATO is supposed to be a treaty of countries that respect rights, and they don't. So the UK would be a current example of a country that sort of got rid of its right to bear arms, and the government's getting bigger and bigger and more tyrannical all the time. And what are the people going to do without that? The government certainly doesn't fear that the English population is going to revolt. And
No.
if you want an example of a country where they tried to revolt without guns, is Myanmar, Burma. They had a very aggressive, nonviolent resistance, and you know what? God bless them, because I believe in nonviolent resistance, but it failed, and now they're involved in this intractable civil war. So Burma, Myanmar is an example of what happens when you don't have a right to bear arms.
Well, here's the other thing. If we take the example that you gave on England, okay, did the murders stop? Did crime stop when the guns were gone? Of course not. Now you have, let's say, some crimes that you would never think would occur. For example, a lot of knife crimes, beheadings, machetes. I mean, gruesome things. So are we going to ban the knives? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, obviously, we have to ban the knife. Forks, I'm not sure about.
Here's another thing. Communist China has put a serial number on every knife in the country that's in the possession of people. So, serializing a knife or a gun really doesn't matter when the person that is holding it, committing a crime, they don't care what it is. So, yeah, you just will go down. Pretty soon, stones will be serialized, but that's not going to prevent anything.
Speaking of China, I have a Twitter account. I can't even remember the title of it, but I keep track of violence around the world. And again, the media doesn't report this. There are mass killings in China. They're often done with a weapon or blade. There are mass killings all over the world. Sometimes they're not reported because, well, maybe it's a civil war situation. And my answer to that is, so what? That's violence. Let's report it. It's violence in a country where there's allegedly no right to bear arms, and that's the source of our problem. So there a lot of these examples are in the two books that I've written.
And what are the names of the two books?
The Second Amendment Works is the first one, which is a very comprehensive discussion of all of the evidence for the Second Amendment. And I have numbers and stats and charts. But what I didn't do in that book, I did in the second book, exposing the two big lies of the gun control movement. And that's the book, basically the two big lies, since we're talking about it. One is that the biggest violence problem in the United States is crime. It's not. I know this is stunning and shocking to many people. The biggest source of violence in the United States is our own government. And I'm not talking about routine law enforcement against violent criminals. I'm just talking about, I actually took out my calculator and added up all of the acts of violence that the government commits against peaceful citizens. Whether you agree with those policies or not, again, I'm kind of a political scientist on this. I'm just, don't shoot my calculator. The government engages in trillions of acts of violence against American citizens. Most of them are threats of violence, which are real. I don't think anybody can deny that a threat of violence is real. Otherwise, bank robbery would be legal, I suppose. I'm just threatening you with a gun. It's not really a crime. So that was the first big lie. And the second big lie is that the United States is an unusually violent country. And as I alluded to previously in the study we did, the United States actually ranks out. If you add all forms of violence, which why not? Why exclude forms of violence? We're actually 27th. And the countries above us are mostly sort of monocultural European countries. There's some islands in there. Islands tend to be relatively peaceful because they're islands. And so we're actually doing quite well. We could do a lot better. In fact, at the end of the book, I have a whole chart about things we could do to reduce violence in the United States. So, those are the two books.
Do you think that, one last question for me, do you think that by the time the Trump administration is done, in 3 years from now, do you see any momentum in change in the Second Amendment based upon your research and understanding of the subject?
I think the best thing Trump can do, he was pretty good on Supreme Court choices. Here's the thing, and I've talked about this before, but I'll talk about it again. when there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court, there's a tendency to think, oh, that lady or guy is a conservative. No, no, that's not what we need to know. We need to know something a little bit more specific. And it is this. Is that person a Hamiltonian or a Jeffersonian?
Okay.
And if you look at the six conservatives, if I can think of them all, Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch, in my view, are Jeffersonians. The other three conservatives are Hamiltonians, and you will find on a lot of issues, those three Jeffersonians are always against making government bigger. But the Hamiltonians, sometimes following Alexander Hamilton, who believed in strong central government, they often go in that direction. So don't make the mistake of a Jeffersonian, who's a person who believes in natural rights, decentralized government, mostly at the local and state level and not that much at the federal level. They will reliably vote for the Second Amendment, which is, when you look at it, it's a way to decentralize political power. And the founders intended that. They wanted juries to be made up of private citizens, and they wanted private citizens to have guns because they knew that government was a dangerous monopoly that had to be checked. So Trump, that's the best thing he can do and I will talk about this, whatever platform I can get, if there is a vacancy. He's got to pick the right people, because ultimately the lower courts are not very favorable to the Second Amendment. We've got to get them up to the Supreme Court and have a better decision at that level. So I think that's the best thing he can do.
And where can we order those books?
Well, all my books are on Amazon. I have 13 books. Most of them are on audio, and most of them are on Kindle, if you prefer that format. Both of the gun books are also on paper as well. And if anybody wants any gun group, I've been encouraging gun groups, particularly the larger ones, buy them in bulk. I will give you a huge discount. Just contact me.
And how do people contact you?
Best way on libertymovement.org. All my contact info is there, but I'm easy to find. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, and very easy to contact. I respond to all non-junk emails and direct messages.
Great. We want to thank you for coming on the Academy Report today. Very informative.
And we'll
This
have
is
you
great.
on back soon, because Second Amendment, boy, that could change in the flip of a hat.
Yep. And your perspective on that Supreme Court, the Jeffersonian versus Hamiltonian, was one of the best I've ever heard.
Thank you. I kind of original with me, but I need to get that out to everybody, because once people you can't unsee it. It's like, oh, I didn't know there was a distinction, and then people will do the right thing.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot. It was great fun.
Uncle Trump has one shot, one opportunity to stop the death of America.